You both, thank you so much for joining us on the programme this afternoon. Let's start with Lord Adonis, should we, first of all. We are in an absolute turmoil, a mess. Even thoughts for a second referendum didn't get through last night. So where do we go from here?
Well, it's true that we don't know where we're going, in that the Prime Minister still hasn't said what motion she's going to table tomorrow, but it looks as if she's going to table her deal again for the third time. You've got Bill Cash on this programme with me, and it'd be interesting to ask him whether he's voting for it, because if he and his colleagues aren't voting for it on the right of the Conservative Party, then it won't go through. And then on Monday, Parliament considers again the alternative options. Now, when you said that there wasn't a majority for a referendum, you're correct. There was a majority against, but the single highest vote that there's been now for any proposition in this Brexit process is the second referendum, which got a much higher vote than Theresa May's deal got, and it's only 27 votes short of getting a majority. So the momentum now is towards the second referendum. I don't think there's any desire in Parliament on any side now to have a whole new negotiation. I mean, the idea of putting the country through the gruesome process we've gone through in the last 2.5 years, I think, is unthinkable. So by a process of elimination, I think we are getting to the second referendum, but whether it will happen while Theresa May is still Prime Minister or whether it will be under her predecessor, who, of course, remember, will be the third Conservative Prime Minister who's had to grapple with Brexit, time will tell. OK, but look, I'm coming to Sir Bill Cash in just a moment, and I'll put that question to him. But, Lord Adonis, the amendment didn't pass, and it didn't pass by 52 to 48%. The irony of that. But it didn't pass. Well, it didn't pass yesterday, but in politics, momentum is all. So unless anyone's got a better idea where we go, and if we don't find a way forward, we crash out of the European Union on the 12th of April, and there's no desire on the part of Parliament for that to happen. There was a majority of 200 against that in the House of Commons last week. By process of elimination, I think we will end up at the second referendum. And so what Theresa May is trying to do tomorrow, clearly, is to establish a further advance for her deal. But there was a majority of 149 against her deal when it was last voted on in the House of Commons, and I don't see her being able to bridge that.
OK, Sir Bill Cash, lots of things to talk to you about there from Lord Adonis. First of all, let's talk about the amendment, the fact that it was the one that lost by the least, if you will. So the momentum is taking us towards a second referendum, is what Lord Adonis says.
Well, I'm not entirely sure that he has much democratic legitimacy, but let's get that one out of the way. Look, basically, the Referendum Act, which was passed, which enabled the British people to be able to vote on the question of leave or remain, was passed by a majority of 6-1 in the House of Commons. That was a sovereign act of Parliament which authorised the referendum and deliberately gave the decision to the British people. The Remainers have never given up, despite the fact that they did lose by a significant majority in the vote itself, and they have, in certain cases, in many cases, in the Conservative Party, let alone in the Labour Party, have reversed their decisions taken not only on the Referendum Act in giving it to the people, so that they now say they can reclaim it, which I said yesterday is complete rubbish. The second thing is that they got the notification of Withdrawal Act 499 to 120, and then the Withdrawal Act itself, which on third reading even Kenneth Clarke voted for. So they're reversing those. This is a dreadful exercise of indicative votes that's going on at the moment, and one of them is the referendum. It wasn't only defeated last night, but it was defeated a few days ago when Sarah Wollaston put it up, and it only got 85 votes in the House of Commons.
Oh,
it's just
okay.
It's just a completely incredible.
Okay,
yes,
if there is
please.
not at all, if there is a third meaningful vote, I'm not quite sure how that can happen, given that the Speaker said that's not possible. But let's wait and see. If there is, which way will you vote?
Oh, I'm definitely voting against the withdrawal agreement. I've set out my case in the House of Commons and in articles I've written in the Telegraph and all sorts of newspapers, and I've said it many times. And why? Very simply, the backstop completely undermines the constitutional status of Northern Ireland, which is why the DUP are not prepared to accept the withdrawal agreement either. But on top of that, there is the issue of control over laws. Prime Minister quite clearly stated at Lancaster House, and she was right at that time, saying that we will never truly leave the European Union unless we regain control of our laws. I'm chairman of the European Scrutiny Committee. All the laws that come out of the European Union pass through our hands. And basically, Article 4 of this withdrawal agreement enables in fact, directs that under that withdrawal agreement, laws which are made in the Council of Ministers behind closed doors without a transcript by a qualified majority voting of 27 other countries, with us not there, will, in fact, and by accelerated procedures in some cases, which could be very, very damaging to the United Kingdom, they go through, and that is a complete loss of control over laws. One last thing, Kay, on that, if I may. It is the fact that there are procedures which can accelerate the passage of those laws. There is a myth around that it all takes about 5 years for these laws to go through. I've got 200 unclear documents at the moment because in the national interest these have been held back for a variety of reasons, and they are still in the pipeline. The reality is that these laws which they'll bring in, and Germany and France will dominate already. They call the shots in the European Union, and those laws will put us at the mercy of our competitors. And I don't think British business has woken up to that, and they should have done, because it's been said many times by me.
Lord Adonis, lots to pick out of the bones there.
Well, there's only one significant thing you need to note from what Bill Cash has just said, which is that he's not voting for Theresa May's deal if it comes back to the House of Commons tomorrow, and quite a number of his colleagues on the right of the Conservative Party aren't going to be voting for it either. So it's inconceivable.
We're Democrats.
It's inconceivable that her deal will pass. That's the significant thing. Now, as a country, we have to find a way forward, because if her deal doesn't pass tomorrow, and as I say, there just aren't the numbers for it.
What about if the Labour MPs vote with her?
Well, only 3 Labour MPs voted against her deal last time, and I can assure you there aren't going to be. I'd be surprised if there are more than 3 who will vote for it tomorrow. You're dead in the Labour Party if you vote for a Conservative Brexit deal, which is going to trash the economy, trash people's jobs, and £39 billion that we'd have to pay the EU for a less good economic deal and less good trade terms than we've got now. So it's very clear that her deal isn't going through. But unless we put something in place to stop no deal, we will leave the European Union on the 12th of April. And that's why I think the momentum for the second referendum is gathering pace. And Bill, when he just spoke, failed to mention that last night there were 268 MPs who voted for the second referendum, which is the highest number of MPs who voted for any proposition in this Brexit process. The momentum is all going towards the second referendum now, and I suspect it's only a matter of time before Parliament votes for it. The significant question is what the choice will be as against staying in the EU, because it looks as if Bill Cash and his colleagues have entirely finished off Theresa May's deal. So what will the alternative proposition be? After 2.5 years, there isn't a credible Brexit proposition on the table. Brexit has essentially been imploding, and as it implodes, the attractiveness of staying in the European Union gets brighter and brighter.
So, Bill?
Yes, well, shortly, there are very, very good reasons for leaving the European Union. As you know, I've campaigned upon this for 2 decades and more. And the reason for it is that we ought to be able to run our own affairs in our own country in accordance with the wishes of our own people in general elections. It's a simple principle. Lord Adonis, who is in the House of Lords and therefore, as I said, doesn't have much democratic legitimacy, actually forgets when he says we are on the right of the party. Actually, that's rubbish. What we are is Democrats supporting the vote of the British people and supporting the acts of Parliament which led to the referendum and the Withdrawal Act of 2018, which repeals the European Communities Act and all the laws and treaties as the British people instructed. And the bottom line is that that is something to fight for, because this is about democracy, it's about integrity, it's about fighting for principle. These may sound like high-flown words, but they are have real meaning, and people fought and died for these principles, and I don't think we have any right at all just to let Parliament run amok over this. And this indicative vote thing that's going on at the moment, as I said yesterday, is like a bag of licorice all sorts. I mean, nobody really knows which way it will go, because they keep on forming themselves into different factions, and it's like whelks running a whelk stall.
Lord Adonis?
Well, again, the same point applies. What we're hearing from Bill Cash is that her deal is not going to go through tomorrow. So something has to happen. I take it from what Bill Cash has said, though maybe he'll address this, that he's in favour of there being no deal and us simply leaving the European Union without a deal on the 12th of April.
Well, that's been
decisively voted against in the House of Commons by a majority of 200. That is what the government told us. This is what the government itself said in papers that it published would lead to the ports not operating properly, 6 weeks of medical supplies, huge chaos in the running of our economic life. There's very few MPs besides Bill Cash who think that that is a tolerable outcome, and that is the reason why something has to happen. If we're not going to have her deal, and there's no majority for it, and it is a terrible deal, then, and we're not going to have no deal, then something has to happen. There isn't going to be a further negotiation. I mean, the idea we spend another 2 years chasing after a unicorn better deal, I think, is fanciful. The only alternative, which MPs are coming to realise week by week, and that's why support is gathering pace, is a second referendum, which of course is a democratic exercise. It's an exercise of democracy, and clearly the people then need to have the opportunity to stay in the European Union.
Could I just come back on that? It's simply this. Kay, is that all right?
Yes, absolutely.
I'd just like to say this. Under the Lisbon Treaty Act, which was passed in, I think, 2008, the Article 50 arrangements were put in place by our own domestic law. It's not just a matter of having it imposed upon us by the EU. We actually voted for that. I happened to vote against it. In fact, funnily enough, the Conservative Party did as well. But the actual question of this so-called no deal issue is not the way it's put is as if somehow it's been created by members of Parliament. In its own right, it was actually implicit in the fact that under the Article 50 arrangements, within your own constitutional requirements, if the Lisbon Treaty Act is looked at, what it says is that after 2 years, unless there is an extension, which is now obviously taking place under the arrangements that were voted through last night, the repeal of the 72 Act ceases, and that 2-year deadline is set by the very legislation that I've just referred to and European law. Okay. So it's not as if we're aiming at a no deal, it's that is the timeline that's been laid down by the enactment itself, which, by the way, Adonis voted for.
OK, Lord Adonis, it's written down. There it is. Those are the rules.
It doesn't matter that there's a legal basis for there being no
deal. Oh, really?
That doesn't matter. That doesn't make it any more tolerable.
I see.
That doesn't matter. That doesn't make it any more tolerable. And not to Parliament. The key point is what is going to be tolerable to Parliament, because it's Parliament that makes the law and takes the decisions democratically. What Bill Cash is making is a very distinct point, which is that there is a legal basis for no deal. That doesn't mean that it's legally inevitable. It's only legally inevitable if Parliament votes for no deal. And Parliament, as Bill knows, has voted by a huge majority against there being no deal. That is the democratic will of Parliament. That being the democratic will of Parliament, no deal won't happen. It doesn't look as if Theresa May's deal is going to happen. We're not going to be chasing more unicorns, Norway, different forms of customs unions and all of that for 2.5 years. That isn't going to happen. So what you're left with by a process of elimination is a referendum giving people the option to stay in the EU, because after this 2.5 years of fantasy negotiations, putting the whole economy of the country and people's jobs and livelihoods and future prospects at stake. The country itself now wants this resolved, and the only way it looks to me it can be resolved is a democratic referendum giving people the option to put this nightmare behind us and stay in the European Union.
Okay,
well, just very quickly, I thought Lord Adonis was a Europhile. I thought he was in favour of European legislation. I've just set out that's the law of our land.
OK, so Bill Cash, why is it that leaders of the Conservative Party just don't seem to get on with Europe? We've seen 4 prime ministers be brought down by Europe. What is it?
Well, basically, it's not the leaders. It's actually the fact that we've never really been fully engaged with the European Union. I mean, the reality is
Tony Blair seemed to do quite well.
Well, well, he didn't actually, because he got stumped.
He's the longest-serving prime minister in the country, I think, in history, isn't he?
Well, actually, yes, but don't forget that he himself was arguing for a constitution for the referendum, and he had to back off that. But leave that aside. That was his view. The bottom line is, you asked me about Conservative leaders, and of course Margaret Thatcher, who I knew extremely well, she was very much against it, as it turned out, as she progressed through her political leadership.
Okay.
But actually, we take John Major, he blew it.
He did.
David Cameron blew it.
He did.
And now Theresa May's blown it.
Yep, that's my point.
Yes, I know, and the reasons for that is because they've actually attempted to do something which the British people have never been comfortable with, and which actually, both in the House of Commons and outside, don't forget the Conservative associations talking about the Conservative Party only a couple of weeks ago passed a motion by 5 to 1 saying that they really wanted to get on with the whole job of getting out, and that they didn't want an extension, and they set down a whole series of conditions.
OK, gentlemen, we are out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. Running a whelk stall, is that like turkeys voting for Christmas?
Well, it's a sort of inverted version of it, yes.
Got it. It's good to talk to both of you. Thank you very much indeed.